I said only insecure men want monogamy. Now he's sleeping with someone else. And I can't even be mad. Okay, so this is absolutely wild. And I'm still trying to process everything that happened. Like, I literally can't even be mad, because this is technically what I asked for, isn't it? My name is Lena. I'm 32 years old, and for the past 5 years of my life, I have spent my breath confidently telling everyone, especially my husband, that monogamy is for the birds. Or, more specifically, for insecure men who can't handle their partners having freedom. And now, well, let's just say the universe decided to call my bluff, in the most brutal way possible. I met Owen at the Daily Grind, the coffee shop where I work as a barista while trying, and mostly failing, to finish my first novel. He came in every Tuesday and Thursday, like clockwork, always ordering the same thing, a large black coffee, with room for cream. I noticed him right away, because unlike most of our customers who barely looked up from their phones, he actually made eye contact. He said thank you, like he meant it. Plus, he was gorgeous, in this understated, quiet way. Tall, with these deep green eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. He worked as a risk analyst for a big insurance corporation downtown. Nothing flashy, just steady, solid. After 2 weeks of him coming in, I finally scribbled my number on his cup with a stupid little note that said, "For a non-emergency." He texted me an hour later. We went out that weekend, and it felt like we'd known each other forever. He listened when I talked about my writing. He actually asked questions about my characters, like they were real people. He remembered their names the next time we talked. No one had ever done that before. We dated for 2 years before getting married, a small ceremony at his parents' lake house. Even back then, I was vocal about my views on relationships. I'd gone through this grand feminist awakening in college and had all these big ideas about how traditional marriage was a patriarchal trap. I'd read all the books: Ethical Non-Monogamy, Relationship Anarchy. I truly, deeply believed that jealousy was just insecurity in disguise. I'd tell Owen, and anyone else who would listen, that only insecure men need to possess a woman. That real love, evolved love, means wanting your partner to experience everything life has to offer. Looking back, I can see it so clearly now. The little crease that would form between his eyebrows whenever I'd go on one of my rants. He never argued with me, though. He'd just nod slowly and say something like, "That's an interesting perspective, Lena." I took his silence as agreement. Or at least, as him coming around to my obviously more enlightened way of thinking. We moved into this cute little apartment in Willow Creek after the wedding. Nothing special. Just a one-bedroom with terrible water pressure and neighbors who fought at 3 a.m. But it was ours. We each kept our separate friend groups. Mine were mostly from the cafe and my writing workshops. His were from work and his weekly basketball game. We had our own hobbies, our own interests, which I thought was so incredibly healthy. My friends thought we were the perfect couple. My best friend, Chloe, would always say, "God, you guys have it figured out." My boyfriend, Mark, won't even let me go to the grocery store without calling to check in. And I'd smile this smug little smile, feeling so evolved, so enlightened. I truly believed Owen, and I had cracked the code to a happy marriage. Independence, with just enough togetherness. For 3 years, everything seemed perfect. I kept working at the cafe, picking up extra shifts to save for a writing retreat. Owen got a small promotion at work. We took weekend trips to the coast, binge-watched shows together, and had inside jokes that made us laugh until we couldn't breathe. But underneath it all, I was starting to feel restless. Like there was more out there. Like I was missing out on something. If I'd been paying attention, if I'd bothered to look outside of my own theories, I might have noticed that Owen was happy with exactly what we had. He didn't seem restless. He didn't seem confined. He seemed content. But I was too busy philosophizing about relationships to actually see the one I was in. And that blindness, that absolute, unshakable confidence in my own enlightened views, was about to blow up everything we had built together. It all started at Chloe's housewarming party. She'd finally moved out of her parents' place and invited basically everyone she knew to come see the tiny studio apartment she was so proud of. I was grabbing another drink when I spotted him. Caleb. We'd had a few classes together in college, but hadn't really kept in touch. He'd gotten even better looking. He was a freelance photographer now, shooting for indie bands and cool local brands. He had this new confidence that made my stomach do this weird, fizzy, flipping thing. "Lena?" he said, his voice a low hum over the music. No way. He pulled me into a hug that lasted just a second too long. How the heck have you been? Are you still writing that crazy sci-fi novel about the moon colony? The fact that he remembered my writing, it knocked me sideways. We ended up talking in a corner for over an hour, completely ignoring everyone else. There was this energy, this electricity that I hadn't felt in, well, not since the very early days with Owen. Nothing happened. No kissing. Not even hand-holding. But the spark was undeniable. The texting started the next day. Just casual stuff at first. Links to articles about photography. Funny memes about caffeine addiction. But it quickly became a daily thing. A little hit of dopamine every time my phone buzzed with his name. We started meeting for coffee during my breaks. Again, nothing physical happened. But there was this undeniable what-if hovering in the air between us. The way his knee would brush against mine under the small table. The way he'd hold my gaze just a little too long. And that's when the idea really took root. Why shouldn't I explore this? Why shouldn't I feel this again? Monogamy was a social construct, right? I'd been saying it for years. Maybe it was time to practice what I preached. The hard part was figuring out how to bring it up with Owen. I waited for the perfect moment. A Saturday morning. We were both relaxed, coffee in hand, the sun streaming through our kitchen window. Babe? I started, trying to sound casual. I've been thinking about something. Owen lowered his coffee mug, that familiar little crease appearing between his eyebrows. Yeah? You know my views on relationships, and how I think monogamy is kind of an outdated concept. His posture stiffened, just slightly. What's this about, Lena? Well, I've been reading more about ethical non-monogamy, and it just makes so much sense. People aren't meant to get everything from just one person. It's too much pressure. His face changed then. It was subtle. A slight tightening around his eyes. Are you attracted to someone else? I waved my hand dismissively, as if the question was absurd. That's not what this is about. It's about freedom and honesty. Don't you think there's something beautiful about loving someone enough to let them be completely free? I didn't mention Caleb. Not yet. I thought we were happy, he said, his voice quiet. We are, I insisted. This isn't about happiness. It's about growth, about not limiting each other. I leaned forward, taking his hand. His skin was cool. Then I delivered the final blow. The one I knew he couldn't fight back against without proving my entire point. Only insecure men want monogamy, Owen. You're not insecure, are you? It was a low blow, a manipulation. And I knew it, even as the words left my mouth. He pulled his hand away. He stood up, took his mug to the sink, and stood there with his back to me. His shoulders were tense. I need to think about this, he said. Over the next few weeks, I continued my campaign. I left articles about polyamory on the coffee table. I brought it up casually in conversations, weaving it into discussions about movies or books, all while texting Caleb more and more frequently, meeting him for longer coffee dates where our hands would accidentally brush. Owen grew quieter, more withdrawn, but I was so focused on what I wanted that I interpreted his withdrawal as contemplation, as him processing, evolving. In reality, he was retreating. Finally, after nearly a month of my persistent nudging, he gave in. We were lying in bed, the room dark except for the streetlight filtering through the blinds. Okay, he said, his voice flat, emotionless. If this is what you really want, let's try it. I propped myself up on one elbow, surprised by his sudden capitulation. Really? Yeah, he said, his gaze fixed on the ceiling. You're right. Maybe I am being insecure. And the way he said it, the defeat in his voice, it made my stomach twist. But I pushed the feeling away. This was a victory. We'll have boundaries, of course, I rushed to add, trying to sound responsible. Complete honesty, safe sex, and our relationship always comes first. He just nodded. His eyes never left the ceiling. Whatever you say, Lena. I was too excited to notice the resignation in his voice. All I could think about was texting Caleb, telling him the door was open. I fell asleep planning our first real date, a giddy excitement buzzing under my skin. Next to me, Owen lay awake until dawn. The arrangement began almost immediately. I didn't waste any time. The next day, I let Caleb know that Owen and I had opened our relationship. His response was enthusiastic, though he did ask, several times, if Owen was truly okay with it. Of course, I assured him, brushing off his concern. We're very progressive. It's all about honesty. We scheduled our first official date for that Friday. Dinner at this trendy new Italian place downtown. I spent hours getting ready, trying on different outfits, doing and redoing my makeup. I felt like a teenager again. When I finally emerged from the bathroom, Owen was sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone. He looked up, and for a brief, fleeting moment, I saw something flash across his face. Pain, maybe? Or was it just resignation? You look nice, he said, his voice carefully neutral. Thanks, I replied, a sudden wave of awkwardness washing over me. I won't be late. Probably home by 11. He just nodded, already looking back at his phone. Have a good time. That first date with Caleb was everything I had imagined. The conversation flowed easily. The attraction was palpable, and for the first time in years, I felt that fluttery, nervous excitement of something new. We ended the night with a kiss on his doorstep that left me breathless. I floated home on a cloud of validation. When I got home, the apartment was dark. Owen had already gone to bed, or was pretending to be asleep. I quietly got ready for bed and slipped in beside him, leaving a careful, deliberate distance between our bodies. In the morning, he didn't ask about my date, and I didn't offer any details. It was the first of many silences that would grow between us, thick and suffocating. Over the next few weeks, I saw Caleb regularly. We went from dinner dates to spending entire afternoons together, exploring the city, ending up back at his place. We went from kissing to much more. All while Owen became increasingly absent, physically and emotionally. He started working late. He was at the gym more often. He kept his responses to my questions brief and non-committal, but I was too caught up in the novelty of Caleb to really notice. Or maybe I just didn't want to. It wasn't until about a month into this new arrangement that I casually mentioned to Owen that he, too, could see other people if he wanted. I brought it up while I was stirring pasta sauce on the stove, trying to sound breezy. I mean, that's the whole point of an open relationship, right? I said cheerfully. You're free too, you know. He looked up from his laptop. His expression was unreadable. Right. Thanks for the reminder. And, have you thought about it at all? I asked, a flicker of morbid curiosity rising in me. About seeing someone else? He shrugged, his eyes returning to the screen. Not really. Well, the option's there, I said, turning back to the stove. I didn't mean it. Not really. The truth? I liked the idea of Owen waiting at home for me while I explored. The power dynamic felt good. Me, the evolved one, the explorer. Him, the steady, constant anchor. I never seriously considered he might actually take me up on my offer. That evening, I noticed him texting more than usual. A small, private smile playing at the corner of his mouth as he typed. A tiny seed of unease planted itself in my stomach. But I dismissed it. Owen wasn't the type to actually see someone else. He was too traditional, too steady, wasn't he? As the weeks turned into a couple of months, something shifted. The initial frantic excitement with Caleb began to fade. The conversations that once seemed so deep and electrifying started to feel repetitive. The thrill was wearing off. Meanwhile, Owen had changed. It was in subtle ways, things I couldn't quite put my finger on at first. He seemed more self-contained. He no longer asked me about my day or seemed interested in my latest writing progress. When I came home from dates with Caleb, he didn't seem to care. There were no subtle shows of jealousy, no passive-aggressive questions. Nothing. Just a polite nod and a good night before he returned to whatever he was doing. At the same time, I noticed other changes. New clothes started appearing in his closet. A different cologne, something woody and expensive, replaced his usual scent. He paid more attention to his appearance in general. He'd always been fit, but now his shoulders seemed broader, his jawline more defined. His phone became a constant companion. It would chime with text messages that made him smile in a way I hadn't seen directed at me in months. It wasn't until I was paying our cell phone bill online one evening that I noticed something odd. There was a number, one that appeared dozens, maybe hundreds of times in Owen's call and text logs, far more frequently than any other contact. A number I didn't recognize. My heart started to beat a little faster. The next morning, over breakfast, I tried to mention it as casually as I could. Hey, I said, trying to keep my tone light and breezy. I was paying the phone bill yesterday and noticed you've been texting someone a lot. A number ending in 4382. Owen glanced up from his toast, his expression perfectly neutral. Oh, that's Sophie. She's the lead underwriter on the Henderson account at work. Seems like a lot of texts for work, I said, forcing a little laugh. He just shrugged. She's thorough. We've been putting in extra hours on this one. It's a big deal. Something in his tone, the way he said her name, Sophie. With a familiarity that suggested more than just a professional relationship, it made my stomach tighten. But what could I say? What ground did I have to stand on? I was literally spending multiple evenings a week with another man. But I wasn't just curious anymore. I was uneasy. And that unease grew as I began paying more attention. The late nights at work, the weekends when he'd be gone for hours, supposedly at the gym or running errands, but would return with no obvious purchases. The way he no longer reached for me in bed, not even accidentally in his sleep. Meanwhile, my thing with Caleb had completely plateaued. We still saw each other, but the excitement had faded into something comfortable but ultimately unsatisfying. I found myself thinking about Owen more and more during our dates, wondering what he was doing, who he was with. I suggested a weekend getaway to Owen, thinking some alone time might help us reconnect. I can't that weekend, he said, not even looking up from his phone. I've got plans. What plans? I asked, trying not to sound as desperate as I felt. Just plans, Lena. Things I need to take care of. It was the vagueness, the casual dismissal. That's what finally pushed me over the edge. After 3 months of our open relationship, I realized I had no idea what my own husband actually did with his time anymore. We were living like polite roommates, sharing a space, but not a life. And it was eating me alive. I decided to surprise him at work for lunch. I told myself it wasn't to catch him in anything. Of course not. It was just to see him, to reconnect in some small way. A friendly gesture. I picked up sandwiches from his favorite deli and headed downtown to his office building, a sleek, imposing tower of glass and steel. But as I approached the entrance, I saw him, coming out, with a woman. She was stunning in that effortless, confident way. Tall and willowy, with honey blonde hair and a laugh that carried across the plaza. But what knocked the wind out of me, what made my vision tunnel, wasn't her appearance. It was the way Owen was looking at her, with a warmth and an attention and something that looked terrifyingly like adoration, the way he used to look at me. I stood frozen on the sidewalk as they walked together to a nearby bistro. His hand rested casually on the small of her back. It was a gesture of easy, familiar intimacy. Through the large glass window, I watched them sit at a table. He pulled out her chair for her. They leaned toward each other as they talked, his entire focus on her. Their hands were intertwined on the tabletop. And then, as casual as breathing, she leaned forward and kissed him. It was a quick, familiar gesture, a peck on the lips, the kind of kiss that spoke of established intimacy, of shared mornings and inside jokes. My vision blurred. The bag of sandwiches suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I turned and walked back to my car in a daze. I drove home on autopilot and sat on our couch, staring at nothing, until I heard his key in the lock hours later. "Hey," he said, sounding surprised to see me home early. "Everything okay?" My voice was steadier than I felt. "Who's Sophie?" He paused in the doorway, his expression shifting from surprise to something more guarded. "Resigned. I told you. She's a coworker." "Is that all she is?" A long, heavy silence stretched between us. The ticking of the clock on the wall sounded like a drum beat. Finally, he sighed and sat down in the armchair across from me. He didn't try to lie. "No," he said simply. "That's not all she is." My throat felt tight, like it was closing up. "How long?" "A few months," he said, his gaze unwavering. "Since about a week after you started seeing Caleb." The revelation hit me like a physical blow, a punch to the gut. "You've been seeing her this whole time, and you never told me?" He looked at me then. Really looked at me, for what felt like the first time in months. And there was no anger in his eyes, just a profound, weary sadness. "You wanted an open relationship, Lena," he said, his voice soft but firm. "You said only insecure men want monogamy. What was I supposed to do with that? What did you expect?" "I don't know. Maybe talk to me. Tell me you were actually acting on it." "Why?" he asked. "You never gave me details about Caleb. You made it clear that was the point. Freedom. No jealousy. No questions." "That's different," I said. Though even as the words left my mouth, I knew how hollow and hypocritical they sounded. How? He asked, his voice still gentle, which somehow made it worse. How is it different? I had no answer. The truth was, I'd wanted the freedom without the consequences. I had wanted Owen to remain faithfully, predictably mine, a safe harbor to return to while I sailed off on adventures. I had never, not for 1 second, genuinely considered what it would mean for him to do the same. The question escaped my lips before I could stop it. A desperate, pathetic whisper. Are you in love with her? Owen looked down at his hands, studying them for a long moment before answering. I don't know if it's love yet, he said, his voice heavy with a truth that shattered me. But she makes me feel valued. She makes me feel wanted. She doesn't make me feel insecure for wanting a committed relationship. Each word was a knife. Not because they were cruel. Owen wasn't being cruel, he was just being honest. They were a knife because they were true. I had made him feel insecure. I had belittled his desire for monogamy, branding it as old-fashioned and regressive. And now, someone else was affirming the very things I had dismissed. Someone else was giving him what I had told him he was weak for wanting. Tears finally spilled over, hot and stinging. So, what happens now? He looked at me, his green eyes filled with a sorrow that mirrored my own. I don't know, he said, his voice cracking just a little. But I can't keep living like this, Lena, pretending I'm okay with an arrangement that I never really wanted. We talked long into the night. Really talked. For the first time in months. Owen admitted he'd only agreed to open our relationship because he felt cornered. Like he had to choose between being labeled insecure or losing me. He said my theories had made him feel like his own feelings, his own desires for a simple, committed love, were somehow wrong, defective. I admitted that my desire for an open relationship had been less about philosophical beliefs and more about wanting the thrill of novelty without the consequences of betrayal. I wanted the validation from Caleb, but the security of Owen. But some truths, once spoken, can't be taken back. Some changes, once made, can't be undone. In the weeks that followed, we tried. We really did. I ended things with Caleb. It was surprisingly easy. Vince promised to be more open about his feelings. We went to therapy, both together and separately. But the distance remained. A chasm had opened between us, and we didn't know how to bridge it. Owen continued seeing Sophie. Now, though, it was with my full knowledge. He would tell me when he was going out with her. He would come home from these dates with a lightness in his step that I couldn't remember seeing in him for years. A genuine, unburdened happiness. Meanwhile, I found myself alone with my thoughts, confronting uncomfortable truths about who I was and what I really wanted. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening, nearly 6 months after our relationship had first opened. Owen sat down across from me at our small kitchen table. His expression was serious, but calm. Lena, I need to tell you something, he began. I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I've realized something important. A took a deep breath. I want monogamy. I've always wanted it. Not because I'm insecure, but because that's how I'm built. That's what makes me feel safe and loved and connected. I nodded slowly, tears already threatening. I knew where this was going. And Sophie? She wants that too? Yes, he said quietly. She does. And I'm the one who doesn't. I finished, the bitter irony not lost on me. He reached across the table, his hand covering mine. I think maybe you do want it, Lena. I think you've wanted it all along, but you spent so long convincing yourself otherwise that you can't admit it. I pulled my hand away, a sudden surge of anger cutting through the sadness. Don't tell me what I want. Okay, he said, leaning back, his hands up in a gesture of surrender. Then you tell me. What do you want, Lena? The question hung between us, deceptively simple, utterly impossible to answer, because the truth was, I didn't know anymore. I'd spent years building this identity, the progressive, evolved partner who was beyond jealousy and possessiveness. But when faced with the reality of Owen connecting deeply, meaningfully, with someone else, all my enlightened theories had crumbled into dust. I want things to go back to how they were, I finally whispered, my voice small. Owen's expression was gentle but resolute. We can't go back, Lena. Too much has changed. I've changed. A week later, he packed a suitcase. Just the essentials, he said. He said he needed space to figure things out. We both knew what that meant, even if neither of us said it out loud. He was moving in with her, at least temporarily. Testing the waters of a relationship built on shared values, rather than theoretical ideals. As I watched him fold his shirts and place them neatly in the bag, a bitter realization settled over me. I couldn't even be mad at him. Not really. This was exactly what I had advocated for. Freedom. The freedom to follow your heart, to pursue connections without the constraints of traditional monogamy. Owen was simply taking the philosophy I'd preached and living it to its logical conclusion. He paused at the door, suitcase in hand. I do love you, Lena. I always will. But love isn't enough. Not if we want fundamentally different things. Do we? I asked, desperately clinging to the possibility that this was all just a terrible misunderstanding. Want different things? He gave me a sad, knowing smile. I think we might have wanted the same things all along. We just couldn't admit it, to ourselves or to each other. And then he was gone. After he left, I sat alone in our apartment. My apartment, now, I supposed, and I tried to make sense of it all. How had my confident theories led me here, alone, and completely, utterly heartbroken? How had I failed to see that what I really wanted wasn't freedom from commitment, but the absolute security of knowing Owen was committed to me, while I was free to explore? The truth was humbling. For all my talk about evolved relationships and freedom from jealousy, I was just as possessive, just as traditional in my desires, as anyone else. I had wanted to keep Owen safely wrapped up in our marriage while I experienced the thrill of something new. When he'd done the exact same thing, it had broken me. I couldn't even be mad at him. That was the worst part. He'd simply taken me at my word. He had followed the path I insisted was enlightened, and in doing so, he had found someone who valued what he had to offer all along. His loyalty, his desire for monogamy, his steady, traditional heart. As I scrolled through old photos on my phone, pictures of Owen and me in happier times, I wondered how I'd gotten it so wrong. How I had mistaken his quietness for agreement, his patience for evolution. How I had been so convinced of my own rightness that I couldn't see the profound harm I was causing. One photo made me pause. Us on our wedding day. My mascara-smeared face beaming up at him, his green eyes crinkled with that special smile he reserved just for me. We had been so happy then, so certain. Before I decided that certainty was boring, that happiness needed enhancement. I set the phone down and wiped my eyes. The apartment felt too quiet, too empty. I thought about texting Caleb, but I knew that would only be running from the truth again. Instead, I opened my laptop, and I started writing. Not my novel, but the story of us, of how I'd been so focused on what I thought I should want, that I completely destroyed what I actually had. Maybe someday Owen would read it. Maybe someday we'd find our way back to each other, older and wiser. Or maybe not. Maybe some lessons come too late, and the price of learning them is losing what mattered most. All I knew for certain was that I couldn't even be mad. Not at Owen, not at Sophie, not at anyone but myself. I had said only insecure men want monogamy. Turns out, what I really meant was that only an insecure woman needs to test her partner's love by seeing how much freedom he'll tolerate. And in the process of discovering that truth, I lost the one person who had loved me enough to let me learn it my way, even when it meant losing me.